Hello, listeners. Hi, my name is Madhavi, and I'm so happy to have you on Upptalk. You have come to the right place if you want to learn about IT and do really cool things with your hands. We are not just another IT company when I say Upptalk. Think of us as your learning partner dedicated to helping you reach your full potential. We have top notch hands on courses to help you build your business, whether you are new to technology or want to move up in your current job. Let's look around this as our first step towards learning.
We'll look at the concept of security in Prism. Now, how many phases does Prism have? When you said phases, I mean the Prism management workflow, right? We saw that the Prism management workflow. I'm not an ETL tool. There is extra transform in load. Yes, there is. We have extract, transform, and load. But this is overall divided into several phases, or 5 phases to be precise, right? We get data by creating tables, data sets. We then transform this data by creating derived data sets. And then we apply security to this data. We make this data available for analysis. And then we finally analyze this data right. We have already completed the phase 1. In the sense we have created our tables and base data sets to bring all data into Prism. And then we created a number of derived data sets. Right. To finally get the data in the form that we wanted, right? Which means now we can apply security and then we can make the data available for analysis. All right. Now, if you remember, in terms of Workday Security, when we did discuss some bit about Workday Security. In terms of phase 1 and 2 that we have completed, how we did speak about security in brief, right? When we initially started, remember, right? We said for example, let's talk about Workday report. When you run a Workday report, you need access to the report. And within the report as well, you'll only see those rows that you have access to. Right? And plus, within the rows that you see, you'll see only those columns that you have access to. For example, you may not have access to date of birth and you don't see that. But then when the data comes into Prism environment, which is dataset or table Workday, removes all security. Correct. Right. Right. Workday removes all security. And basically anyone who has access to the data set within data catalog or table within the data catalog can access all rows and can access all columns. Right. There's no constraint security at all in terms of Prism environment. Now, in terms of security, what kind of security can be applied? On table-based data sets, derived data sets within data catalog, we call something called table sharing and data set sharing. Basically, there are two types of security here. The first one is the security access that is granted. Admins, your security administrators. This will basically determine whether you can access data catalog all or not, right? Whether you can access the data sets and tables at all or not. That is the basic security, right? And here, if I can quickly go into the tenant and show you the domains, we have Here we have a number of similar domains. For example, you'll be able to create a table. When you have Prism tables, create access. Similarly, you'll be able to create a data set when you have Prism create dataset access, and on and forth. Now for this, if you see, most of these are admin, or if you see, these are all unconstrained domains. Right. That's what I was about to say. These are all unconstrained domains. But then here let me go into the tenant. What we usually do is, let's say, what we do is, if you see, we have a data administrator domain. But if I come back, we also have something called Prism Data Administrator domain. Right. Usually what we do is we have a separate security group type, which is Prism Access Security Group. Whenever we have to give access to Prism, for example, I'm the data admin within my company. I also need access to the Prism environment to create, view, modify the data sets. But then all Prism create and all those domains are not directly added to the data administrator's security group. What we do is we create some Prism Access Security group. This is what we'll do, which is exactly similar. I'll create a security group. Prism Access Security Group, or let me edit one instead of having to create one. If you see, within this is also an unconstrained security group, and within the security group, you assign your data admin and other roles, and then all Prism access to Prism domains is not directly given to data admin, instead to this Prism access security group. Makes sense. What is the data admin? Are those user-based security groups, or these are all user-based security groups? All right. In terms of user-based security group, you don't directly assign Prism domains. In terms of these security groups, Prism Secure, Prism domains are not directly assigned to user-based security groups. In terms of this, you can use example data report writer or data admin. Instead, create a Prism Access Security group and include your user-based security groups within it. That is how Workday has delivered this security group type, and that's how we do it. Right. We create a Prism Access Security group, which is nothing but it is a group of other unconstrained security groups. We create a Prism, and then all Prism related domains are given to the security group. All right. Now, how else can we control? For example, how else can I control who all can see these tables and data sets that I have created? You are giving the domain policies to the Prism Security group. Then it's not related to data administrator, right? Or data analyst. No, let's see it. It's not right. Data admin, for example, I have the data administrator and I may have 10 employees as data admins. Right. I include this data admin in Prism DA and I may have out of these only one EP to an imam P11. On this Prism DA, I give all Prism related domain access and only these three individuals would have access to this Prism DA or they'll have Prism related access. Is that your question? PTA Film 2. This is similar to your intersection and aggregation. If you remember, if you have both data analyst and whatever security groups, if you have the intersection security group, then only you will get the access. This is similar to that concept, right? Now, is there a way? Even in phase 1 and phase 2, where then we have created all base datasets, tables, and derived datasets. Basically, anyone who has access to a specific table or a specific data set. We know that the data set has access to all data within the table and data set without any constraint and without any context. We can restrict who has access to a specific table and specific data set. And how do we do that? If I open any table or data set, go to the related actions. The moment, and if I go to security, if you see I have something called data set sharing. Let me open this. Now the user who created that object, whoever creates a table or a data set, whether it is base or derived, automatically becomes the owner of the data set. Make sense? This I created using the proxy of Logan McNeil. Logan McNeil is the owner of this data set. Questions make sense? Now as owner, Logan can then make someone a dataset viewer or dataset editor. Makes sense. Only dataset viewer can basically view that dataset, or only dataset editor can edit that dataset and further share the dataset with other users. If Logan McNeil gives me the dataset editor permission, let me open some dataset which I would have created. Let's see this one. This is wherever I have. I am the dataset owner. I'll also have the edit permissions. I know because I don't see the edit dataset. I just get a view permission, which means all. Let me proxy as Logan McNeil and then we'll see how it. If I proxy as Logan, you'll see how the permissions change. All right. This is our first data set. Let's open this. If I go to the related actions security, here, If you see, not just I have view data set sharing permission, which ways I had here, but I can also edit the data set sharing and see the entire history. As Logan, I can, because I'm the owner, I can go in here and I can make any one data set viewer. I can make any one data set editor. Now there's something called, if you see this, something called relax sharing as well. Now this is how it works. I have created a, let's say, base dataset one. Right. And then from this I create derived dataset one. And from this I create derived dataset two. For this dataset, this is upstream, right? This side is upstream. This is exactly similar to your integrations. I get data from here. Right. This is upstream for me. Right. Now to access any data set, let's say I'm trying to access this data set or this data set. You must have access to all the upstream data sets and tables. What I can do is I can go ahead and enable relax sharing, saying that even if I don't have access to any of the upstream data sets, let him still access this data set. When you enable this option, owners of the derived data sets from this table or data set only view only need viewer role here. They only need role here. For example, if I give them data set editor access, without having access to any of the upstream data sets, they can themselves go ahead and share this data set with others. Right. If I enable relax sharing, they only need role here to share this data set. Right. They'll not need any access to any of the upstream data sets. I can go ahead and share a data set or table. And when I'm doing that, I can give either viewer access or editor access, and I can enable. The basic concept of relax sharing is, as I mentioned, by default, to access the current data set, whatever it is, you must have access to all upstream data sets and tables that feed into this data set. As an example that we just saw, to share derived dataset DDS, you must have permissions. On the derived dataset that you are sharing, and at least viewer permission on all upstream data sets and tables. If I want to share this data set, I should have the editor permission, because only then I'll be able to share, but at the same time, I should at least have viewer permission on all the upstream data sets. That is the default setting. When I enable relax sharing, it will allow me to share this data set. And you enable relax data setting. Can you change any of the upstreams? No, because on upstream you just have viewer permissions. But can he change the derived data set to like? Because if I have editor permission, I can change. If the editor permission is there, then obviously I can go ahead and. But if you have view permission, then also you cannot change. You can just view the data with the relax permission. Sorry. No. If you have view access and if you have granted relax permission, he cannot change the data set. Number 2, right? No, you cannot. You cannot. He just can view DD1 and video. This is similar to view and modify permission on a domain right. With view, you can only view data with modify. That is, I can go ahead and share by default. The person who created that data set or the table becomes the owner. He can make or share either viewer or editor permissions with any of the individuals. And then he can also give the relax sharing permissions. That is what I can do with respect to security in phase 1 and phase 2, which is basically getting the data as well as preparing the data for analysis. Now all my transformations is done. Now I need to release my data set, basically publish my final data. Once I publish the data, it will be available for analysis. Before I can publish my data, I want to plot appropriate security permissions. The moment I publish my data comes out of the Prism environment, right? It becomes available to users that they can create reports. Let's see what was our final. This is our final transformed derived data set. Right. Now, this is what I would want to publish, but before I publish it, I want to apply appropriate security permissions to it. And I do that. If I go to the data set in terms of security, I have these data set sharing security, which we have already seen, but then I can also apply data source security. As part of phase 3 that we discussed, which is apply security to the data. In phase 3, we apply security to the data, which is basically data source security. I'll come in here security and I'll say edit data source security. Why is that? I do not. This is the case. Setup is perfectly services. This is get the value, huh? Thank you. Let me publish it first. I'm doing phase 4, which is basically I'm publishing this data set. Let me do that. What happens when we publish a data set or when we make a table available for analysis? You can use that table for reporting. This is what happens. Workday creates a Prism data source, applies all security permissions to that data source. When I say applies all security permissions to that data source, the data source security permissions that you have applied in phase 3, and loads this data source with data. From the published object, when I say published object, this could be a table or this could be a derived data set. When I do that, this would take a while. When I do that, Workday creates a Prism data source. Right now, there's no Prism data source that has been created. It applies all the security permissions. Currently, we have not applied any security permissions. It is taking the default security and all the data in this data set gets loaded into that data source. We'll first publish. And the reason I'm publishing it first is because I don't see any of the fields within this data set for applying security. That's why I'm publishing it first. This just takes a while. Let me select some domain first. I'm not sure why. The publishing is successful. At least that's what I saw. It has created a Prism data source. If you see, when I publish a data set or a table, it creates a Prism data source. It loads that Prism data source with all data from the data set. And then it applies all the security permissions. Which means if I go in now and create a custom report, I'll be able to do that with this Prism data source. But that is not what I want right now. What I want is to be able to apply Prism Security. It's also what I want to do. Oh, this is strange. I'm not sure why it is not showing any of the fields. Let me stop proxy. All right. It seems like Logan McNeil didn't have access to update the data source security. This is why I tried to publish it, because it should show me all the fields which are part of the dataset. Right. Now, in terms of security, we can apply two types of securities. The first one is the security at the entire data source level. All right. This basically controls the security at the entire data set. What we are sorry at the entire data source. In terms of security, I can apply security at the data source level. Here we basically specify one or more security domains that apply to the Prism data source that Workday creates. These domains basically determine or control which user or users can access the Prism data source. This is security, just like we have security at any data source level. When we create a report, you need access to the data source, right? Only then you'll be able to run that report, view the data in that report. We are basically, first level of security that we are creating is at the data source level. Now here, based on the data in your data set or data source, you'll apply appropriate security domains. For example, here I see personal data. I will probably want this to be available to. I'll say worker data. I basically want anyone who has access to worker data, active employees, and let's say worker data, all positions, and on and forth. Basically now what is happening? The data source that gets created, it is encapsulated within these domains. And if this domain, this is how it works, right? I have data source DS. I'm including this in a domain. Let's say domain 1. Now we know that domains are part of security groups. Right. Right. If this domain is part of, let's say, HR partner security group, then, and I am a member of that security group, then I'll be able to access this data source, right? Because this data source is included in this domain and HR partners have access to this domain, right? You need to include whatever the data source or the Prism report that you have created in a domain. Is that right? Basically, if you see, now I have said I'm applying the data source security on this data source which will get created. And I'm doing that using these two domains. Now, if I open the first domain, active employees, this domain is shared with all these security groups, which means all of these security groups, they would be able to access the data source that gets created. When I say access, I mean access the reports that are created using this data source, irrespective of the fields that are available in the Prism. We'll talk about field level security. In respect to the field that you have included in the Prism BDS, if you grant access to the domain, then you should be able to look at it. Exactly. because if you see these are not fields. When I say gender, this is not the gender field which is available in Workday. Right? It's not available in Worker. It's in personal information. This gender field is part of this data source, and it has the transformed data that I have modified as part of creating this data source or the underlying data set. Right. If I have access to this domain and no other security is applied, then I'll be able to access every data within this data source. Even if, let's say, in Workday I don't have access to age or date of birth. Because in Workday, if you need access to age, you need access to domain that worker data, date of birth domain. Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. This is the data source level security. Now, optionally, what you can also do is you can do row level security. Now, what is the role level security? There are 10,000 rows in my data source. Can I access all rows? This is similar to your constraint security. There are 10,000 employees in my organization. I can only see compensation for 50 employees. Right. I can also apply a row level security. And how do we do that? With the help of securing entities. If you see, securing entities are required when applying contextual security. I want to give constrained access, and I do that by configuring securing entities. Now, when I go in here, it will show you all securing entities that are part of your data source or your data set. When I come here, if you see, I have management level, I have supervisory organization, I have company. Right? All those organizations or objects which are part of my data set Workday will show here, and I can select one or all of them. Now I have applied these two securing entities. Now that constraint access kicks in. Let's say now I have shared this data set with this domain. DOM1, that domain is available to HR partner, and I am. This EMP1 is an HR partner. And in this data source, there are 10,000 records. If this is the only security I apply, EMP1 will be able to access all 10,000 records. And we will be EMP2, who is also an HR partner, but then I apply row level security RLS. And I say this is secured by your supervisory org or, let's say, location or anything. Right. Let's say support. Now EMP1 is an HR partner for only 5 supervisory orgs. EMP2 is the HR partner for remaining 15 support orgs. Even though both EMP1 and EMP2 are HR partners, and HR partners have access to this domain, which includes this data source, EMP1 will only be able to access those rows which are tied to the supervisory org that they are HR partner for. Similarly, EMP2 will only be able to access those 10,000 rows for which have that supervisory org for which they are the HR partners. Makes sense. This is how I apply the constraint security, and the same applies for any number of organizations I select. Let's say there's another security group called company partner. The same logic. We have also applied role level security using company. Now some person has access to one company. They'll only be able to access the relevant records. Another person has access to 50 companies, each of these. Securing entities act in independence. This is the second level of security, which is basically the row level security. And second level of security, it's kind of a role-based security. Exactly. This gives you that constraint access. And also in the second level of security, you are going to get only organization type of security, because your row level security is usually controlled by organization, right? You create a security group and then you create, what do we create it? Assignment rules. You create an assignable rule and the assignable rule is linked to an organization. Right. That is how you control rule level security in Workday as well. Exactly same concept. The only difference is you'll only be able to select those securing groups which are part of your data set. Because that's how Workday determines. There are 100 employees. One employee belongs to supervisory org A, B. I am an HR partner of that supervisory org. Then I'll be able to see that employee. That's why that row should be part of your data set. Right? Then we have field level security. If you see, this is field level security. Now here, default domain has been applied, which is public reporting items. A public reporting items, it's a Workday delivered domain, right? We cannot configure it. We cannot change it. Basically, what this default domain is saying is all people who have access to this data source will basically be able to access all the columns, all the fields within that data source. I have not applied any column level security at this point in time. Right. And that is why I said maybe HR partner, they don't have access to view gender and race and ethnicity of the employees, but because HR partner have access to this data source. In this data source, they'll still be able to see race, gender, ethnicity, and everything. Now, in order to avoid that, I can create field level security. Now here I can say only those people who have access to this domain, which is person, data, date of birth, will be able to access this column. Make sense? Right. Now this domain, if you see, is available. Worker data, active employees is available to all of these security groups. But out of these secure, they can all access all rows in all rows and all columns in this data source. Right. I then applied securing entities, which means the constraint security group. For example, partners can only access those rows that they have access to based on their company and supervisory org, but they can still access all the columns. Right. Now I'm also applying field level security. Right. Similarly, I am also saying only those people who have access to gender this domain will be able to access this column. Basically, you are assigning the domain and the domain has security groups. That's exactly how to display the data. These domains, only those security groups who have access to those domains, right? They would be able to see this particular data, right? And this would already be controlled and configured. right? This is all configured in you are leveraging Workday Security. You're not setting up entire security model, right? Right? You are leveraging the domains and it will automatically derive. What exactly? Similarly, I can configure for every of each of these fields race, ethnicity, marital status, religion, and on and forth. I can configure for each and every field. And then I'll say next. It will show me any errors, any warnings, the summarizations of everything that I've done. It says this is available to this security group. It gives me some additional information, some audit information. It shows this would be is available to this domain, which is available to these security groups, and on and forth. And if there is any warnings, any issues, right? Let's see. What is this warning? It says the GMS Service Center Security Group isn't supported because Service Center Security Group constraint isn't supported in Prism data source. What it is basically saying is, let's see where is GMM Service Center. It is saying you have shared access to gender and age right with this domain. Right now, this domain is shared with GMS Service Center Security Group, which means GUM Service Center should also have access to age right. But Prism Data Source don't support Jamba Means Service Center security groups at this point in time. It's giving me an audit warning. That means GEMSMM Service Center users will still not be able to access age right. That's It's giving me those audit warnings. I'll say fine and I'll say submit. And now when I go here and view dataset data source security, it shows me. It shows me all security that has been applied. I'll come in here. I can create a publishing schedule. Write that. Why do you want to create a publishing schedule? That whenever the data is effective, maybe you can get based upon that. What happens is once you have published a data set, right, it takes all data in the data set at that point in time, right, and makes it available in the data source. Right now, you have already created an integration schedule to load data into your base data set on a daily basis, or you have already created a data change task to load data into your table on a daily basis, right? Your underlying base data sets and your tables get data on a daily or a weekly or monthly basis. They automatically feed into the derived data set. You don't have to do that. And then that feeds downstream until it reaches the derived data set which has been published. Right now, this derived data set has the latest data which is getting fed into your data catalog on a regular basis, weekly, monthly, annual, whatever, right? But then if this data has to be made available in the data source, it has to be published, right? That's why you have to create a recurring publishing schedule, right? Which is exactly the same concept. You create a schedule and then you say run now daily reclins and on and forth. One thing to remember, whenever you are creating publishing schedule, make sure that your schedule starts only after all your integration schedules or a data change task. Let's say you have integration schedule. I'll say in schedule to load data into your BDS and 2 and 3. And then you have data change task, which loads data again on a daily basis in table 1, right? Right now. All of these, you'll have to understand which one has a dependency. Let's say they don't have any dependency. This is scheduled at 8 a.m. in the morning, and this is also scheduled at, let's say, 8 a.m. in the morning. Now you'll have to see how long this runs happens on a daily basis. Let's say it takes around 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever. Then keep sufficient time that if there is a delay or a failure, if it is, you know it will finish by 12 o'clock, only start your publishing schedule after 12 o'clock, right at the minimum, because only then your latest data would be available in your base datasets. Let's say you publish your dataset at 9 a.m. In that case, when your data set is being published, your derived data set, your base data sets, still don't have the full data right. Your data set would get published without the latest data being available right. Always make sure whenever you're creating a publishing schedule in the publishing schedule should start only after all the integration schedules have completed. Because I applied security, I'll publish data set once again. If we want, we can unpublish the dataset as well if we are making any changes. I want to publish it once again. It shows me all the. Let me cancel this. This is already done. When? Because the publishing is running. Now it doesn't show me the publishing option because publishing is running anyway. Let's do some wait. Not this one. If you see my Prism data sources are indexed, this has created a Prism data source. I can open the Prism data source. The business object is the same as the data source. Workday just appends a Prism to it. If I go in here, alright, when I go in here, this is my primary business object, which is same as data source. And then it's a fixes Prism to it. If I go to this business object, it shows me all the fields that were part of the data source. In terms of data sources, this is my data source. I can come in here. I can create a custom report and it's exactly same from here. I can come here. I can create any of these reports, advanced composite matrix and on and forth. And I can leverage. I can go in here. You can see all the fields which are part of that data source are available and these are all index fields. Well, we've seen all the fields. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@therightuptalk.com.